The moment we've all been waiting for has finally arrived. So Alireza Firouzja has returned to classical chess, the return of the king. He's been away for 5.5 months. We've really missed him. Here's the burning question. What's he actually been doing for 5.5 months? Well, he was asked after the game with Fabi, what have you been up to? How have you been spending your time? And he said, okay, I've been prepping for the candidates, of course, but I've also been playing some sports. I've been relaxing, living life. And that's the thing about Alireza. He's just 18 years of age and already such a phenomenal talent. So whilst, yes, he's achieving tons in the world of chess, he's also trying to just live his life like any other 18-year-old, taking some time away. So fair play to him, having that moment to relax. Now he's got a really big summer to come, and fingers crossed for him in the candidates. But first, fingers crossed for him in this tournament. So it's Bucharest, Romania. It's the Grand Chess Tour, and this is the first event of the whole tour. So today he was playing Fabiano Caruana. He had the black pieces here, really tough opening pairing. Let's see what happened here. So Fabi kicked off with pawn c4, and Alireza actually said afterwards that this was the first surprise of the game. So he expected e4. Fabi's won a couple of nice games with the e4 move. Firouzja has had some trouble against Caruana, so he expected that today. But okay, Fabi goes c4. So Alireza went pawn e6. We had knight c3, and after d5, d4, knight f6, we head back down these main lines here of the Queen's Gambit declined. So Fabi took on d5, Alireza recaptured, and we're actually following now the same line that I covered yesterday in Alireza Firouzja's match against Wesley So. So I'll link that one at the end if you want to check it out. So same structure, the Carlsbad structure. The bishop comes to g5, c6 bolsters the centre, pawn to e3, pawn h6 puts the question to the bishop. It drops back to h4 here, but bishop e7 breaks that pin. Bishop d3 continues the development. Castles from Alireza, and now Fabi goes with this move, knight g to e2. Just as we saw in the Wesley game, you don't put it on f3, you leave the way for the pawn to come to f3 at a later point. White wants to set up this big centre if allowed. So Alireza goes rook e8, castles from Fabi, and now in that Wesley game we had queen c2 and pawn f3, but here Fabi goes a different way. After knight b to d7 from Alireza, he goes pawn a4 here. And this is really interesting because in that game against Wesley, Alireza played pawn b5, he got the knight to b6, and he got a really good game on the queen side. But by playing a4, you actually stop black from playing b5, you play against that whole setup. And this is the top engine move, so Alireza said afterwards he was expecting this, or at least he knew about this move. So he quickly followed up with knight to h5. We had a captures on e7, the queen recaptured, and it might look a bit strange sticking that knight out on the edge of the board, but of course you get rid of that attacking bishop which white had on h4, you activate your queen, you're looking at e4 here, and as I've shown on the board, this knight will recycle back into the game, sometimes via f6 and then into e4, and sometimes black goes g6, puts the knight on g7, brings a bishop to f5. So now we had pawn a5 from Fabi, so he continues that queenside clamp, he takes away the b6 square, and now the most accurate way to respond was actually rook to b8. Black isn't too concerned if this pawn came all the way to a6, because then you can go b5, you've got b6 for the knight, so you can get some similar setups to those lines we see in the other variations. So this would have been more accurate for the main reason that you just hold off playing this a6 move which Alireza played. Now when you go a6 it's not too bad, but you create these holes on b6 and c5 just a bit more prematurely. And now knight a4 was the most accurate move to take advantage of that. Instead, Fabi went rook to a3, so he's looking at this direction here. He defends this e3 pawn in some of the later variations once the minor pieces move. Don't forget, white wants f3, e4 at some point, and sometimes that rook could even come to b3, pressure b7. So a multi-purpose move. Alireza now goes knight to f8, clearing the way for the bishop to develop, and now knight a4 was played at this point, looking at the b6 square, so now Alireza went rook to b8, anticipating that jump. The queen now came to d2, so it protects that e3 pawn, starts to prepare pawn to f3, and after queen g5 from Alireza, activating the queen here, opening up the rook, Fabi actually carried on and played pawn to f3. So it looks like you're just hanging a pawn, but can you see the tactical way to refute black if that pawn is taken? And if you're enjoying this video, do let me know by hitting that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already to never miss a game in this tournament or the upcoming candidates. So the reason you can't take on e3 here is that white recaptures, the rook takes back, and then you've got this simple discovery check. So the king could capture or the knight, then you pick up the rook. Now we see part of the point of that rook coming to a3. You support this third rank. It fits in with this whole idea of going f3, e4 at a later point in time. So we didn't have the pawn taken on e3. Equally, bishop to h3 is no good, threatening mate. You can go rook f2. You can go knight f4 as a good move. Just not the best way for black to play. So pawn g6 now stops these bishop checks and also gives the knight on g7 a square now to then support bishop to f5. So it's all beautifully harmonious up until this point. And now this wasn't the most accurate move from Fabi. So he dropped back his bishop, but actually pawn to f4 was best here. You kick the queen, and at a later point you can actually look to go pawn f5. So even though you create the hole on e4, in compensation you've got something to bite on now here. You open up your rook, you might be able to generate an attack in future. So that was best, but Fabi went bishop to b1. Now it's a solid move, he opens his rook, but now after knight to g7, preparing bishop f5, Fabi went knight f4, very logical, developing move. Alireza went bishop f5, and now Fabi's kind of getting nowhere, because if you take this one, it's looking very, very drawish. Black's maybe even a little bit better here. Pressure against e3, no problems to speak of. So what Fabi did was, instead of taking that bishop on f5, he went bishop to a2, but it's a pretty poor looking move. You know, that bishop's not actually going anywhere soon. You'd have to get e4 in to open it up, but that doesn't look like happening anytime soon when you've got the bishop and the rook clamping this square along with the pawn. So the position's basically just level now, and Alireza goes pawn h5, a good move from him, pushing that h-pawn, looking to undermine the kingside pawns if he can. And this is a nice move from Fabi now, so he goes queen to f2, and one of the big ideas behind this move seems to be that if black goes pawn h4 now, well, you can actually respond with pawn g4, because now that the queen has come here, defends g3, if black captures en passant, you can recapture, that pawn's now defended, and the pawn structure looks quite nice. You could maybe get king g2 soon, bring the rook or something, you know, decent position. You can kick this bishop soon as well, stop the knight coming in. So we didn't have pawn h4 from Alireza. Instead, he just held off on that. He played knight to d7, so he brings that one back into the game. The bishop has now developed, of course, so it can come back to this square. And now Fabi goes pawn h4 at this point. He kicks Alireza's queen. It drops back to f6, and then pawn b4 played. So it clamps on this c5 square. Black's never getting c5 in. And this is where Alireza has to be careful now, because yes, the position's level, but it is less space for black. It is quite cramped. You are passive, playing against the former world number 2. So queen d6 from Alireza, the knight came to c5, and now you don't want to be capturing that one. Then the b pawn recaptures, and look at this backwards pawn on b7. That's a long-term weakness that can be targeted, a miserable position to defend. So we didn't have takes on c5. The knight came to f6, queen g3 from Fabi. So he x-rays Alireza's queen. That one's unprotected. There are threats to say go knight h5, that kind of thing. So Alireza drops back to d8. Fabi goes queen g5, improving the queen, coming around the king. And now Alireza really has to come back to d6 here, reactivate the queen, link the rooks up, and just stay solid in this position. And Fabi was now down to about 4 minutes here. It's not so easy to find proper plans to increase the pressure, so unfortunately he went queen g3, Alireza queen d8, and they actually over repeated the position. They repeated it about 4 times here, but either way, that's how the game ended. So no fireworks there, I'm afraid, but it's just brilliant to see Alireza back at the board. Welcome back to classical chess, and fingers crossed for the rest of the tournament for him. If you enjoyed this video, then do consider subscribing to the channel and click here if you want to see Alireza's game against Wesley So in this exact line. Thanks for watching, see you soon.